the number one that we focus on is actually that it's not just a job anymore. It's an investment of time. And that time needs to be worth it for the person to show up and do their best work and put that time in. Because for most people, you'll spend a third of your life doing whatever it is that you do.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. Rebel HR listeners, thank you so much for joining us this week. I'm extremely excited for the conversation today. We have been talking before I even hit record, and the content has already been wonderful. So today with us, we have Katie Burkhart. She synthesizes connections that enable humans to make the most of the time they invest in their work. She's the mastermind behind something called Matter Logic, which we're going to be talking a ton about today. It is a smart system for running a purpose-driven business, and she has quickly become one of the go-to experts in the space. Thanks for joining us today, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me, Kyle. I'm really looking forward to this conversation since the the appetizer was already quite engaging.
Absolutely. So we were just kind of reminiscing and talking a little bit about the podcast, and I was like, oh, geez, I need to hit record because we've already started to have some great content. So I'm going to back up, and I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to repeat some of the things you just said. But I think the first question that I have is, let's talk about what a purpose-driven business is.
So a purpose-driven business in the simplest of context is that you have to have a valuable reason for existing and a clear understanding of why that matters. So you have to have a purpose. Then you build a business that's focused on that end. So in other words, profit is not the purpose of your company. Profit is the outcome of identifying and effectively pursuing your focused purpose. And the goal then as an organization is you're aligning your goals and your actions in the same direction so that you can be effective in that pursuit. It's really a reorientation. We're driving towards our purpose. Money is going to become our resource versus we're all driving towards money and we're using different tools to get there.
Absolutely. There's so much truth in that. It's so, and I think it's really important to really make a distinction that, everybody kind of has their assumption of what does a purpose-driven business mean? And, to me, it's one of those things that we really need to kind of scope in what we mean by that. What you just described, it's funny. It reminds me of one of the former managers in a past job who, when you would ask him, what are we doing here? He would just say, well, we're here to make money. That should be enough, right? Like that we're a for-profit business. That's what we do. And it's like, okay, but I can't tell that to an employee and be like, yeah, go team. We're here to make money. Now go make more money for me. It doesn't really work. And ultimately, we didn't have great engagement.
Yeah. It's a reality that I think is becoming especially relevant right now. I think it was relevant before. But I think the age, the sort of industrial and even information age where, you went to work because it was a paycheck, and you needed to bring the paycheck home to keep your life going. For a couple of reasons, that's no longer functional. One, we're looking at that and saying like making money for you, not for me, is not particularly motivating, to your point. Like, even as a founder, like I don't get out of bed in the morning just because I want to make money. Like it's just not overly motivating at this point. Two, the line between our work and our life is pretty much non-existent at this point. I am somebody who believes that was always true. You are how you spend your time. So what you're starting to see and the way we talk about the purpose economy is there's lots of factors to that, but the number one that we focus on is actually that it's not just a job anymore. It's an investment of time, and that time needs to be worth it for the person to show up and do their best work and put that time in. Because for most people, you'll spend a third of your life doing whatever it is that you do.
Absolutely. And I love that context, because it's a really powerful mindset shift to go from thinking, oh, a job is just something I have to do, to thinking a job is something where I invest my time and energy and, mental well-being into an organization. Or, another way to think about it is I'm trading my time for dollars.
Yep.
And I just think that context shift is really critical. And I think, my theory on this is we talked a lot about the Great Resignation and, how do we engage and inspire? And, how do we, this young generation, they have such high expectation. I think people have just finally realized and are understanding the fact that, there is an opportunity to do something that fits your personal desires and purpose, and something that can fit, and be balanced as it relates to some of the things that you want to do with your life. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is right now. So one of the things I want to talk about is, because I think it gets muddled a little bit, is what is the difference between purpose, a mission, and a vision?
It's a great question. So everybody asks this because we don't define it very well, or at the very least, we kind of, in our, ever fast moving world, to seem trendy and cool and up with things, we kind of just throw these words out there to all vaguely mean the same thing, but that's very much wrong. And the first component of our system, in fact, it's so important, we broke it out and had it stand alone, we call the core strategy, which includes your purpose, vision, mission, values, and story. And we would tell you that you need all 5 for this to be an effective strategy. Your purpose centers on your why you're here and why that matters. Your vision tells you where you're going. Your mission defines your actions that will take you there, and your values guide how you do those actions. Your story is what translates all the other parts into an accessible human narrative. So we typically list them in that order because we need to know why we exist first. We then need to have some inspiring vision of the future. Where is this all going? Which is part of what makes it worth it. And then people need a mission. They need to understand, like, this is what we're doing every day to get there. And the values are what help people to do them a certain way. We like to say that if a purpose is a filter for your decisions, which it is, values are a filter for human behavior. So that people know this is how we do this here. While you could have 2 companies, both in the marketing space, for example, based on who it is that they serve, they may have very different values that help them to do what they do best.
I really like how you just broke that down, and I can hear, what makes sense to me is it's a systematic approach to building out the story that you want to tell, the narrative that you want people to, whether it's a customer or an employee, to come away from. And I appreciate the way that you articulated it. It's fascinating to me that up until recently, I'll admit it, like, I kind of thought this was just kind of fluff stuff, right? And I think part of that, my career started in very large corporations. And so there was all of this like corporate speak that didn't really mean anything, and so coming from that world into the world I'm in now, which is a kind of a smaller to mid-sized business, to me, it all felt like fluff. But in my current role, I've now seen the impact of starting to build out some of these definitions, albeit not as well as you articulated them here a few minutes ago. So as I think about this kind of pragmatically, and I'm bought in, I get it, I understand the importance, I understand we need to do this. How do we pragmatically go about actually starting this work? How do we start this journey?
So one of the first things that we sort of recommend people take a look at is, and as odd as this is going to sound, but from a human, and especially from a leadership perspective, starting to recognize that it's not about you, which is something that I usually have to say very boldly to a lot of the organizations that I work with, because even to your point about fluffy stuff, in a lot of cases, this is fluffy stuff, unfortunately, because people aren't using it very well. or they never really invested in it. They're just seeing purpose as a tool to make them more money. They haven't actually changed how they're running their business. So getting people to say, okay, it's not about me. This is actually about the humans that make up my organization. Because if I don't have the humans, I don't have anything, which is a really radical shift, especially for businesses that still have the original founder attached. Because we have a tendency, and I get this, I am a serial entrepreneur, I'm a founder more than once, like I understand the challenge, but I would be nothing without building the team. I'm not going to make the impact I want to make without a team. So how do you start to do that? And for the first time, potentially, you're starting to see companies actually prioritize their team over even their customers. Although we don't like to use the word customers, we talk about the humans you serve. You know, who are you actually serving as a business? That's really what your purpose is all about. It's delivering value to that group of people. So that's where you have to start moving from, okay, now I have my core strategy. I understand why I'm here. I understand the value I'm delivering. I understand who these people are. How do I start to put this in? But once you've made that shift, some of the other things start to fall in, really well. A couple of other key shifts include, which I mentioned, money is the resource, not the goal. Helping people to get onto that, helping people to understand that in a lot of cases, it's about saying no more than it is about saying yes, and shifting how decision-making works, at these organizations, and saying, like, if it doesn't fit within our purpose and why we're here, and it's actually going to deliver value, just because it might be temporarily, bring us in a little cash on the side, that's not really what we're here to do. It's distracting us from our goals. Some human has to do that empty work. And I don't want to ask my human to do that empty work. So keeping that on the straight and narrow, as we've talked about, and perhaps, one of the most exciting parts from an HR perspective is that, you're treating your people as someone, not something. And what does that mean? You mentioned that, people all have their own personal purpose, which is true. And starting to think about, it's not about you. It's also about them. You should have a profile for each of your team members that includes things like, what is your purpose? How does your purpose connect into the work that you're doing? And actually spend time being like, hey, your purpose isn't really being fulfilled here. Is that because we have you in the wrong role? Is that because you don't have the skills to get into the role here that you should be in? And how do I help you build those skills? Is it that here isn't the right place for you? And how do I help you make that jump to the next place? Which is a very different way of looking at really cultivating your people. In fact, I made a LinkedIn post today about the difference between train versus teach, which is a language shift, but it's really a mental shift that you train dogs. You also train cogs to fit in a machine because you need them to do that task over and over and over again so that your machine isn't disrupted, versus saying, this is an individual, this is a human being. I have the opportunity to teach them not only things related to their job, but things not related to their job, which means they're going to bring those things to the table. They're going to be in a better position to do their best work. I'm really investing in them and helping them to grow, which is, again, a very different way of looking at people. I could keep going, but I think
yeah, there's so, I'm sitting here and I'm taking notes and I'm reflecting on what you said. There's so much, great things to think through there. I think one of the more, maybe light bulb moments as we were sitting here talking was, the fact that it's not about you. And, so often it's a corporate team. A lot of times HR is in the room here trying to figure out, okay, what do we want our mission to be? What do we want our purpose to be? But a lot of times that purpose already exists, whether you want it to or not. So
yes.
What's the balance there between, it's like the chicken or the egg? Like, is our purpose what we already exist to do, and we just need to articulate that? Or do we actually have to create an aspirational purpose and then try to get people aligned towards it? What is the right approach there, or is there a right approach there?
You may have already picked up on the fact that I'm a little bit of a word nerd, looking at how words work. But one of the phrases that I don't like is when people say we discovered our purpose. And I'm like, that's scary. You've been operating your business this long and you have no idea why you're coming to work every day. Like, that's frightening. And I have no idea what's happening to your poor team, not to mention the people that you're trying to deliver value to you if you've absolutely no idea what value you're delivering. We like to use the word either define or refine because it's there. You know, to my point earlier, most people, even those that would like to make a lot of money, don't start a business just to make a lot of money. They start a business to solve a problem. They start a business to fill an opportunity. Like there's something, even if it's thin, other reason that they started doing this work. So trying to uncover, like, where did that come from? And is that still accurate? The other piece of this where we're, in our work and when we work with organizations, and it always surprises them, is historically, to your point, this work has been done in a closed room with the C-suite. And like, they sit around, they put Post-it notes on walls, and, you know, Puff the Magic Dragon shows up and poof, you know, we have our stuff, you know, and it's like, this is silly. Like, this is the definition of navel gazing. Like, if you're here and it's not about you, you're here to deliver value to somebody else. Wouldn't it make sense to talk to somebody else? So we spend, when we work with organizations to develop these pieces, to give them, in a lot of cases, they're giving us drafts and we're like, let's not assume these are perfect. Let's go through the process and make sure we get them right. A big piece of what we do are listening sessions. So we don't just survey. We actually put people in a room and facilitate a discussion, especially with their customers, but also with their team, to understand what's already happening. You know, what do the people you serve really care about? What really gets your team out of bed in the morning? You know, like, what's not working? You know, and one of the things that we do, which surprises people, is we don't run those by ourselves. We actually ask the leadership of the organization we're working with to come on and listen. We've been doing most of these virtually because that's what we're doing these days, and ask them to sit and listen. And in almost every case, they walk away being like, oh my God, that's what they said. So you're telling me, like, we've been going in the total wrong direction? And I'm like, apparently, you know, like, let's sit down. Sometimes it's not that extreme, but they're like, we didn't even know this was an opportunity. We didn't see that this could be happening. And then taking it another level deeper as far as how you really make it work, making sure that you're using the language they use. I think because right, wrong, or indifferent, cough, wrong, purpose has a tendency to live with the marketing department. It can be glamorized to sound really nifty with words that don't mean anything to anybody. And that's not really the point. Yes, it should motivate you to get out of bed in the morning. Yes, you should, you know, think about words that have some energy, but thinking about it in the language of your people is ultimately going to be more effective.
Yeah, I made that mistake at one point. You know, I'm really, you know, you talked about words. I'm a word nerd as well, but I'm like, if you want me to say something without saying anything at all, I'm really good at that, right? Like, I can speak corporate jargon like nobody's business. But and earlier in my career, I would rely on that because it was like, you're trying to, maybe sometimes you're just trying to not take a firm position, or you're trying to, maybe make somebody just feel better, but you want to also help them understand maybe they need to change their behavior. And so you say it in a way that's really flowery and fluffy and kind of like a soft landing, but still kind of says what you wanted to say. But I'm at a point now in my career where it's like, listen, real speak, like you just it's gotta be clear. It's gotta be simple. And if you use too many big words, who are you trying to impress? And a lot of times you're probably using them wrong anyways, right? It's like, the word of the day, toilet paper. It should not be where you got your purpose, your mission, and your vision from, right?
No, just no. And it's something where we've all been there, right? Where we're sitting in a room and somebody important just came in and they use like 6 really big words, and we're all sitting there and we're nodding because it's like, well, I don't want to tell him he's wrong, or I don't want to tell him that I don't know what those words mean either. So it's not helping anybody communicate very well.
It sounds good though. It sounds really good. Yeah. But I think it's funny because it's like, I think that's such a symptom of the groupthink that happens in a boardroom, right? Or like an executive meeting. But the majority of your employees are not having that experience. That, if anything, that just frustrates them more than anything else because they just feel like you're being fake.
Yes. And it's something that I think sort of decoupling this as a marketing activity is huge because there's still, and I get it, I understand why, they're the biggest proponents of making sure this is working. In fact, some people will call it brand purpose. And I sort of jump up with my hammer spear and I'm like, wrong, like just wrong. And if you keep going down this path, what's going to happen is we're going to be forever skeptical of what's actually a really powerful model and is going to be really, not going to be, is really effective in the purpose economy. We just need everybody to come along and get there. So it's an interesting process and looking at, how do you systematize it? So once you have it, how do you get it out of the boardroom so that it's actually in the business? There's some great research I was reading, and I'm going to totally forget whose it was, that was looking at like CEOs, like 50% of CEOs feel really good that they're running as a purpose-driven business. They have the purpose and they use the word activated, but like 20% of their employees would agree. So what's happening is you're seeing that not only have we only gotten to half of CEOs who feel they're doing a good job, most of their people would disagree with you. And it's because they got that core strategy. They've set their focus. They know who their people are, and they sort of stopped there. Whereas we would tell you that you need to look at how you make decisions. You need to understand what outcomes you're striving for. What are you helping the people you serve do, achieve, or become? Have you put together a 3-year plan and translated that into a 1-year plan so that people are putting their efforts towards the things that are going to help you achieve those outcomes? Have you aligned your team in a way that is pointing you towards those outcomes versus keeping people in silos? Very few big things happen with the marketing department by themselves. The world is just too complicated for that. Do you have measurements in place so that you know what's effective? Are you communicating so that people are staying on the same page? And then most importantly, do you have a process by which we call it calibrating, but actually listening, reviewing, and realigning and adjusting to make sure that you're staying focused on that purpose and delivering on it effectively?
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I'm thinking through, the challenges that we face in human resources. A lot of times we are kind of like the employee communication department, right? And the de facto PR person internally, right? And a lot of us didn't come from that world, right? Many of us came from an accounting background or, an administrative background, operational background. Very few of us came from a communications background, right? And it's not until you get to these big, massive companies and get a communications director that you realize, oh, wow, I really didn't know anything about communications and I've just been shooting from the hip. So as we think about kind of that cascading the purpose and getting that down into the organization and then making sure that we've got that kind of that feedback loop back up to catch ourselves going the wrong direction. My guess is that Matter Logic probably has some of these some support systems in place for some of these systems. So how does Matter Logic fit into this, and how do you support, or how do you think about supporting a business become more purpose driven?
So what we do is we help you to create those components that I just outlined. So we want to make sure that you know what your focus is. We want to make sure we understand who those people are and what their experiences actually are, and then working with you to say, let's set those outcomes. Let's make sure that we know, what does value look like for them? Because their success is our success. So let's put those out there. Do we have a 3-year plan? Sometimes this is called strategic planning. But in a lot of cases, is again kind of done in a closed boardroom type of way. How do we do the parts that the leadership needs to do? How do we make sure that we have team involved with developing, especially the tactics that go into making this plan happen, helping them to rethink how decisions work. And what we use is really looking at a decision case, which is a little bit different than I think how decisions work at a lot of organizations, which are very top down, but making sure people understand what's going on. For example, it's great to have these other pieces that I'm going through, but what gets lost in a lot of cases is the reason, right? So when we talk about purposeful work, that's purposeful and people automatically put the aspirational tag on it. But I'm like, let's get more pragmatic. What they're looking for is for it to make sense. So if I told you to get up and start a list of OKR platforms or write an article on shoes or schedule a meeting with Fred, my guess is your gut reaction is something like, okay, but why are you asking me to do these things? Machines will do what you tell them to do, period. Humans want a reason because we're thinking creatures. We want to understand what we're doing, and we want a point, right? Like we want to know that there's a point to the time that I'm investing in whatever this task is. And we also want to know that you value us, which is part of what giving me that reasoning is for. So making sure, and it's why we actually spend so much time on decisions, that you have a really good decision-making culture, that everyone can make aligned decisions, that everybody understands what's going on with decision-making, and that there's an easy way to understand what decision was made, why that decision was made, and how it's tied back to the purpose, so that that's clear across the organization. So those are some of the things that we really focus on. And then, of course, that calibration component of how do we make sure that you're going through this cadence to stay aligned. And with a lot of our organizations, we will actually do the work and then check in with them every year to make sure that they have someone there to help coach them to stay that way.
What's really interesting is it's not just about putting together a pretty purpose and putting it on your website and putting it on your wall, right? It's all the way into the decision-making mechanisms and kind of the way that you actually run your business and the goals and objectives and everything has to align. So I want to talk a little bit about this because I guarantee you that there's some people listening right now and they're thinking about their organization and they're thinking, nothing that we do is really that exciting, or maybe we don't make a product that is like green or environmentally responsible, or maybe, maybe we've been talking about our purpose, but really all my senior leadership team cares about is money. So for those organizations that are maybe struggling with that or maybe aren't in that kind of a niche of like an ESG type company, what tactics or what's your approach there for maybe the organizations that don't have as clear of a line of sight to their purpose?
So I would say you highlighted two different circumstances. One is I'm not sure what I'm doing is all that exciting, and to you I say that's not true. And I think that there's many levels on which we can talk about this. One of which is, in our effort to shift how people are doing business, there's been a lot of hype on those companies that, are saving the world, and not a lot of hype on all the other businesses out there, which are most of them, that enable those other businesses to function, or are doing other things that we need, so I think a lot of, to sort of put this into a story mode, if you're a person or a business, you have to file taxes every year. Okay. It's just as my grandmother would say, you two things you have to do in life, which is die and pay taxes. And you didn't have some people file them themselves, but for those of us businesses, I would not recommend it, and that person disappeared, or that person did a really bad job, and is costing you a lot of money, or is causing, the IRS to come back after you. that really stinks. So we forget that there's a lot of value delivered in things that we don't consider sexy. But are essential. My tax planner is one of my favorite people. And I'm so happy to invest in him, and I appreciate the value he delivers, but he has definitely thought about, who do I serve? How do I serve them best? How do I align my company around serving them best? That's why I'm here. And I make money because they hire me to come back next year and the year after and the year after that. So he's shifted his mentality, even though I think most of us would consider taxes to be essential, but the most boring thing under the sun. So there's that group of people. And I would always say to them, like, who do you serve in this business? How are you delivering value to them? And I think we'd all be surprised that when we think about those companies or those products or those brands, whatever word you want to use, that you buy from, that you're like, oh my God, I don't know what I would do without XYZ. In a lot of cases, for most of us, they're not the sexy companies, because life is not always sexy. To the other group of people that are like, my C-suite just isn't into it, I would say, welcome to a lot of worlds. And even for clients we're working with, typically the person who brings us in is one level under C-suite, who can see that it's not working, is a little bit closer to the rest of the team, and is saying it's not working for them either. We need to do something different. And they were able to get enough buy-in from their C-suite to bring someone in and try to get them reoriented. And whether you bring someone like us in, or you're bringing in content and you're suggesting ideas and saying, hey, how about we do this differently? That can be really beneficial to get them to see that, we need to do things differently, and pointing to pain points like we're losing people, which is happening rapidly. And we're not going to be successful if we don't fundamentally change what's going on. I think can be a good conversation. And unfortunately, there will always be those companies who just don't get it. So if you're an organization or you feel that your company just doesn't get it, there's a lot of opportunity right now for team members to be coming together and saying, hey, guys, like we have to do this differently, even though you're not getting it. And in all honesty, most of the groups I work with, we're being brought in by what we call second in commands, somebody who's like right under the main C-suite who's saying, hey, this isn't being communicated very effectively. Hey, we have this mission statement out there, but it doesn't make any sense. In fact, one group had it published that like our mission is to make money for the shareholders. And people were like, seriously? Like nobody is going to rally around that. Like it's just not working. And it takes some internal effort to get internal buy-in. But I think if there's enough buy-in coming bottom up, it will start to force the C-suite to shift. And I think that maybe by getting someone like me, a practitioner, an outside source who can come in and help them learn the things they need to learn. But even if you don't do that, there are a lot of good resources out there to say like, hey, here are ways we could be doing this differently that I think would be really effective. And here's why. Here are things we need to recraft because this isn't actually a purpose statement, or at the very least, it's not a purpose statement that's getting anybody out of bed in the morning. So how do we start to make those changes? But this is an opportunity, I think, somewhat unprecedented, where bottom up has a lot of power to start to get the company to shift.
Absolutely. I think, I've been doing this for not quite 20 years yet, but this is the first time where I feel like the balance of power has shifted, away from the employer and the people who are holding these coveted jobs to people who have a choice now between where they work. And I truly believe those without a purpose, those without any sort of structure around supporting their employees, and those who just prioritize profits above all else, they're just not going to get the best people. And without the best people, you're just not going to win. I mean, I just think it's as simple as that.
No, I could not agree more. We sort of break it down to the, what's your so what factor? Like you sold another widget. So what? Like, so freaking what? Why should I give a crap and come in here and make this happen?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, I think about like in the context of you want everybody to care as much as the CEO. And Gary Vaynerchuk has a great take on this, but it's like, listen, they're not making as much as the CEO. They don't have equity. They don't care as much as the founder. And why would they? Right. You can't expect that. But But if you can find something for the team to rally around so that they care a little bit more than they do today, yeah, you can do a lot.
Absolutely. And I think without that, to your point today, they're going to leave. Like, you're just not going to get the best talent. And if anything right now, which I realize there are a lot of factors in this at the moment, you may not be getting talent at all, given the number of jobs that are just sitting open right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think, it's funny. And, I think it's a really interesting topic, and I wish we had more time to dig into it, because I think it's a whole nother podcast. But, just those organizations that can articulate their purpose and have people aligned, you can tell it without any sort of like posted purpose. You can tell everybody's on the same page. They're working the same direction. Like, it's fun to be there. And if you've ever had the opportunity to work on that kind of a team or work with that type of employer, it's just great. People don't leave when they're having fun and they're working with their friends, and there's positive inertia, because they want to see what happens tomorrow, because they don't get up just to get a paycheck so they can go, have a beer on a Friday night and complain about their job, right? Like that. Nobody wants to live like that.
No,
and we don't have to.
No, we don't. And in fact, it was a striking moment to me as a kid, which is sort of how I got into this work. My first job was as a lifeguard, and it was a very necessary job. And you would think very motivating. You're saving people's lives. And on one hand, that's true. But my employer didn't do a very good job of imparting that onto us, even though I understood the responsibility. What had ended up happening over my tenure was the pool became less and less and less popular. So you spent an awful lot of time sitting on a lifeguard chair, staring at an empty pool, which is not overly motivating, because I do not need to save the water from itself. So what you would do is you'd sit there for 15 minutes and watch the 15 minutes tick by. And then you'd move to the next chair and watch 15 minutes tick by, and then do it again. And I was like, I don't ever want to be in a situation where I'm literally watching time tick by. I will never get back. And so much of my motivation day to day is to say, how do I come into organizations and make sure they're building a business where nobody is having to do that? Whether that's making meetings better, making decisions better, aligning their team better, but just not doing that.
So good. Yeah, I've had that. I've had one of those jobs early in my career. Never again will I want to watch the clock tick. All right. Well, this has been just an absolutely wonderful conversation. And as I said earlier, I wish we could keep it going, because I just think there's so much great content here. But we are rounding the end of our time together. So I want to shift gears and go into the Rebel HR Flash Round. So are you ready?
Oh, I am ready.
All right. Question number 1. What is your favorite people book?
I would actually say The Hobbit, which is probably not an answer you get very often. But for myself, when I think about building that team where it's fun and exciting and we want to be here and we're using our skills and whatever else, I love this book. Number 1, you have to go out of your house and do something to have an adventure. And I think with as comfortable as it is to be at home these days, we all need the kick in the ass to go out and do something to have the adventure. I love that it's a team of 13. It's not one magnificent founder with his flowing red cape that manages to save the day. It's actually the ordinary guy who ends up, their contributions are so critical in keeping everything moving forward, as well as the ending that, if we focused on human things versus just making gold to make gold for gold's sake, the world would be a better place. And I'm like, yes, it would. Thank you. So I would say if you have not read it in a while, please do. And it, I know it had problems, but the movies had good points.
That is the first. That's the first time we've heard that book, and for that question. So congratulations, Katie.
Thank you.
All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
I would say, speaking of HR professionals, one of my favorite people that I follow, and I'm always looking to them to learn from them, is Aaron Hurst, who's the author of The Purpose Economy. I believe coined the term, but please don't hold me to that. Has a great book by the same name. His current venture is called Imperative. And what they do is the peer coaching platform is what it's called, but he's really taken that to a whole new level, and understanding, what employees are looking for in their work has changed drastically. And it provides a really great way to be teaching, nurturing, growing that talent in a purposeful way.
Awesome.
So I would say definitely follow him. His company is, yes. And so the book is great, The Purpose Economy, but Imperative, the company, is also, they seem to offer pretty regular webinars with really smart people looking at how you're building and growing a team today and for the future.
Perfect. All right. Last question. How can our listeners connect with you?
So there's a couple of ways. Number one, if you find me on LinkedIn, I am one of those people that will accept all of your connections and will happily talk to you if you have questions. I also post on LinkedIn just about every day, trying to get a useful nugget out there. The second place to connect is to join the weekly, which is something I put out every Monday, typically at 10 o'clock, with something a little bit more in depth, but incredibly applicable. How do I really run a purpose-driven business? And this is what it's meant to answer, so that you've got something every week you can apply to shift how you're doing business. You just need to go to matterlogic.co/weekly and jump right on that list, totally free to you. And you're certainly welcome to explore the MatterLogic site, where we've actually published our whole system open source, if you'd like to learn more about it. And again, looping back to that LinkedIn, please feel free to drop me a note and ask me any questions.
Awesome. And we will have that information in the show notes. So open up your podcast player, check it out. Katie, it's just been an absolutely wonderful conversation today. I can tell that you are an expert in what you do, and really appreciate you sharing us some of your insight here today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm always happy to come back anytime. I can tell we could talk about this for a long time.
Yeah, I'm sure you have other meetings, but if you got another 3 hours or so, we can just keep going. But I'll give you a reprieve for now. Well, thank you again, Katie. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.